the Earth's the wrong way round. There's something astray here. But to lawyers, and as I say, experienced financiers, this is just the way that it works. And certainly the company could have taken advice. And I suppose if you don't take legal advice, or if you do get it and you ignore it, it's a business risk like any other, unfortunately.
Just a quick question. Who else aside from rental car companies should be using the PPSA?
Absolutely, tons of people. So, for example, if I sell goods to you under a reservation of title clause, if you don't know what that is, Jim, I can explain it, but it's quite common for traders to sell goods, particularly stock, to retailers and others on the basis that title doesn't pass until they get paid. Well, that used to be fine, but under the PPSA, that's largely irrelevant where you've got other third parties involved. So if I sell those goods to you and you've got a relationship with a bank where they've got to charge over all your assets, despite the fact that I own the goods until payment, if I don't register a financing statement, the bank will have a better claim to those goods than me if you become insolvent. So there are things like leases of equipment and goods where it's for more than a year. There are reservation of title situations, and there's the really obvious stuff that's always applied where you give a mortgage over property or a charge over property. In the old days with companies, we used to call those ventures.
Yeah.
So those are definitely secured security interests. But in addition, there are these sort of things that are deemed to be security interests. And the very common knowledge, all of my clients who come to me would know about this, people who are trading and selling goods or who are leasing goods. And there's a lot of information that you can get for free out there as well. So it's not just a question of going to lawyers.
I think you've explained it nicely for us, though. Steve Jukson, thank you very much on the panel. A couple of things to ask our panellists before we go. New Zealand out of the Rugby League World Cup. Captain Adam Blair put a very brave face on things.
I'm proud, like Kid said, of what we've created. We've been on a really good journey that's changed a lot of things in the Kiwi jersey. We've set some high standards. We've created a great working environment where people respect each other and they want to be respected.
Okay.
So I'm emotional because I'm proud.
An interesting implication here that maybe it's the journey that's important, not reaching the destination so much. I mean, it's interesting. I'm not really being sarcastic. Do we need to rethink our obsession with the scoreboards here? If he thinks the team's never been in better heart and the coach is saying the same thing.
I'm sure many of the fans won't take such a light-hearted approach. I mean, I get it. I get what he's saying, and I think, it's nice to try and take something positive from this experience if you can, but it seems they haven't really fronted up whether or not it's the players, the coach, the CEO of New Zealand Rugby League. It seems like it's just a giant failure from all angles.
Put on your big boy pants and front up and just say we played badly, we were outplayed, we didn't deserve to win, we were never going to get there. Because that was the case. And don't go blaming the media for all your
blaming the fans.
There are sports out there who would die to have the kind of coverage that the league gets. They don't get paid anything to play either.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're judging it by results. You say that's. No,
I'm just saying. If you
have the
lose,
profile, if you have the money, front up.
Own it.
Yeah, own it.
It's a harsh assessment.
Exactly. A harsh person.
Alexia Russell's been on the panel today. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. And Johnson Watahira, kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora.
That's our lot, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and Checkpoint with John Campbell's coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, I'm John Campbell. Coming up on Checkpoint after the news at 5, Waikato DHB Chief Executive Nigel Murray. He took a $560,000 salary, spent 6 months last year travelling and racking up expenses of 90 grand. Tonight we asked the DHB's chair, Bob Sincock, please explain how that happened. Also tonight, fears grow. People on fixed incomes won't be able to afford rates increases in Auckland. Can the Kiwis coach David Kidwell survive after that disastrous Rugby League World Cup campaign? The panel was just talking about Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe calls a media conference. Everyone thinks he's going to resign. He doesn't. What next? Wellington's rental crisis and Moeraki's rabbit plague coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. More than 120,000 Aucklanders have gone online today to check their new council property valuations. The council said last week city home values had risen on average 46% over the past 3 years. But today was the first chance for owners to look at individual property details. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall reports.
Polly Williams called the 40% rise on her Mount Eden villa interesting. Being below the city average means there's a chance her rates rise next year will also be below average. Auckland Council says it beefed up its website after it crashed 3 years ago when property values went online, and there have been no problems today. Property owners will have to wait until next June to see how their next rates bill will be affected. The council valuations are not necessarily market prices. Atui Tamaki Makoro, ko Todd Niall tēnei.
People staying in rented homes for longer because they can't get into home ownership is one of the reasons being given for a big drop in the number of rentals available. TradeMe head of property Nigel Jeffreys says the number of houses available for rent is falling at the same time as the number of would-be tenants increases.
If you look at it at a national level, the total stock available to tenants is 50% lower than we were the same time last year. A massive drop. So what's been happening is that the total stock's been steadily diminishing over the last 12 months.
Mr Jeffreys says the situation in Wellington is worse. The total rental stock there is down 69% on last year. A new standalone government agency will be established in January to start planning for a manned re-entry into the drift of the Pike River mine. If the decision is eventually made that it's safe to re-enter the 400 metres of the drift that remain unexplored, it could happen in late 2019. The minister responsible, Andrew Little, has revealed the timeline for a possible re-entry and the agency's budget of up to $23 million over 3 years. The agency will gather evidence about what happened in the 2010 tragedy in which 29 men died and consider how to avoid such accidents in the future. Mr Little expects the agency to deliver him a plan by early 2019. The plan would then be peer-reviewed and a decision made about whether it's safe to proceed. The Taxi Federation says the growing danger to cab drivers means it's getting harder to find people who will work on Friday and Saturday nights. The police are hunting for those responsible for a shooting of a Wellington taxi driver at the weekend. The man, who's from Ethiopia, is recovering from shoulder surgery in Wellington Hospital. A Federation spokesperson, John Hart, says alcohol and increasing drug use by commuters has made many drivers reluctant to work weekends.
It's very, very difficult to get taxi drivers out there on Friday and Saturday nights because of the dangers. Many of them just say, well, they're not prepared to face that and don't go out.
John Hart of the Taxi Federation. The police say they're making good progress in the case. The police say it's positive that deportees from Australia appear to be committing less crime in New Zealand than was predicted. Early last year, police forecasted that up to 55% of deportees might stand convicted of some kind of offence, no matter how minor, by now. However, jailable reoffending by all deportees managed by corrections is running at just 13% in the past 2 years, including just 2 sex crimes. The police say it's difficult to predict reoffending because they know significantly less about deportees than they do about local offenders. They say they had prepared for high rates because of the reintegration issues deportees face, so it's positive the rate is lower than previous years. A person has been hit by a train in Upper Hutt. The police say they were called to the scene near Hiratonga railway station about 4:10 this afternoon. Their condition is unknown. Metlink say buses will replace trains between the Taita and Upper Hutt stations. The 4:20 Wairarapa service has also been delayed. It's 5:04. The former Kiwis coach Graham Lowe says current mentor David Kidwell needs to go. New Zealand Rugby League has launched a full review of their disappointing World Cup performance, and Kidwell says he's unsure if he'll put his name forward again as coach. Lowe says Kidwell was never the right choice.
I feel sorry for David because I'm sure he's given it his best shot, but, you know, he's probably out of his depth. he shouldn't survive it because the worrying factor is we've got no leadership in the game. This probably should have already been dealt with.
Former Kiwis coach Graham Lowe. New Zealand's world champion men's sprint team of Eddie Dawkins, Sam Webster and Ethan Mitchell has claimed gold at the Oceania Championships in Cambridge this afternoon. The team outgunned its Australian counterparts Patrick Constable, Nathan Hart and Jacob Schmid in the final. Australia's Carly McCulloch and Stephanie Morton took gold in the women's team sprint, overcoming New Zealand's Emma Cumming and Olivia Podmore in that final. The Australian pair broke the women's team sprint national all-comers record in qualifying. And Lydia Ko has finished in a tie for 16th at the LPGA Tour season, ending Tour Championship in Florida. Ko didn't win a tournament this year, but pocketed $1.7 million. Thailand's Araya Jatanagarn won the event on 15 under par, 6 shots clear of Ko. And that's the news.
Mugabe fired by his party.
He's a very, very stubborn man. He's always gone right to the edge, sometimes over it.
Shots fired in Wellington.
Why the hell? You win. If you play poorly, you lose. It's as simple as that.
Straight Shooting Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the move to set child poverty reduction targets into law. And after 10, mafia mushrooms and the wood wide web. Professor of Evolutionary Biology Toby Kears on standover tactics in an underground marketplace. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Taumaranui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells, isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihape. Fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Waitatapa and Wellington, cloudy periods with the odd shower today, mainly about Waitatapa. It'll be cloudier tomorrow with a few morning showers. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, mainly fine with morning and evening cloud tomorrow. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges both today and tomorrow. For Canterbury, cloudy periods with isolated showers about the high country. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with occasional showers spreading north. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, often cloudy with isolated showers. Fine spells increasing tomorrow, but remaining cloudy across eastern Otago. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with isolated showers. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's almost nice to have you with us. Thank you for being with us, everyone. You are indeed with Checkpoint. Busy program tonight. Let's begin in Waikato, where the chairman of the District Health Board has denied responsibility and refused to resign over the overspending by the DHB's former chief executive. Now, Nigel Murray resigned as CEO last month after spending 6 months of last year travelling and racking up expenses of $218,000 over 3 years. That's just expenses. The board chair, Bob Simcock, says Dr Murray, who was on a salary of $560,000, acted outside DHB policy on a number of occasions, but he wasn't to know. We want to look at this in some detail and at length. Our health correspondent, Karen Brown, asked Mr Simcock how many days Mr Murray was absent in the last financial year.
I haven't done a tally of the days that he was away. Obviously, news media have suggested it was a very significant amount. You know, his resignation has come as a result of unauthorised expenditure on travel. So I think you can take it that an amount of that was not authorised.
Give us some idea, Bob, how much wasn't authorised. I know you can't down to the final.
I'm not able to do that, but it is clear that that's what this whole investigation was about.
So how on earth would the chief executive be able to rack up the extent of expenses that he had and travel without correct authority?
Look, I think that's something that will become clearer. Quite clearly, he acted outside of policy on a number of occasions, so that we have procedures and policies around how bookings are made, and it's become clear that a number of those bookings were made outside of those processes.
Shouldn't you have been more closely in touch with him? That was your primary responsibility and no one else, wasn't it?
Well, actually, it's his primary responsibility. But certainly I was aware of what I was authorising. It's very difficult for me as a chair to be aware of things that are not put in front of me.
Did you not have any idea? I mean, he was obviously away a lot.
I was aware that he was travelling quite a bit, but again, I was not always aware when he was away or not. We spoke regularly, often mostly by phone, and it's obviously apparent now that I wasn't necessarily aware of where he was when he was speaking on the phone. Peter Hughes, the State Services Commissioner, was quicker to the mark than you in terms of concern and trying to launch an investigation and find out what went on? No, that's not correct. The first that I knew of an issue about how expenses were being spent, I immediately raised that with both State Services Commissioner and with the Ministry of Health. What Peter Hughes was concerned about was his failure to file reports as they should have been reported. But that's actually a somewhat separate issue. One's about reporting what's occurring, the other is about what the actual expenditure is. It's now apparent that what was filed is not accurate.
Do you feel hoodwinked by this man?
I feel incredibly angry. Not just at a personal level, but actually I think the pressure it's put on our organisation over the last several months now has been, had a big effect on our staff. They've had to carry on doing the work that they do every day with all of this coverage going on in the media, and it certainly hasn't helped them in that process. But I have to say they've done an outstanding job through it all.
Also, patients, I imagine. Now, the District Health Board spent $145,000 investigating this unexplained spending. There were 9 staff working for 950 hours. Media advice alone cost almost $11,000. I mean, basically, the public is waiting for operations, have to stand in line, haven't got everything they need, they want more, and the doctors and nurses and so on are saying that they're burnt out. I mean, at a time like this, it's a terrible look.
I accept that absolutely. I think it's totally unacceptable for all of us that we're having to go through this process. But once issues were raised, we do have to investigate them, and that does have a cost associated with it. So
you think that Nigel Murray went around whatever checks that might have been in place? I mean, he basically played you for a fool, didn't he?
I'm not going to comment on whether he played us for a fool. Certainly he didn't comply with policies and processes that we would expect him to comply with.
And you were the one responsible?
No, he's the one responsible.
But you should have picked it up as the chair of the DHB.
Well, you're saying I should pick it up. You need to explain to me how I would do that. In fact, if there are no documents that I see that indicate the problem.
So you didn't see any documents at all? You should have demanded documents, I guess.
Well, I see the documents that are supposed to reflect the expenditure that's going on. In reality, that's not what happened.
You just didn't see any at all, or you saw wrong ones?
Well, I saw all of the documents that I authorised.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm saying, when somebody travels in the organisation, they are required to put in a document that gets signed off by the person who's able to sign off their travel. I saw a number of those and authorised a number of those. Quite clearly there was expenditure that was never presented in that way to me.
It was extraordinary expenditure too, wasn't it? But as well as that, Bobby, I mean, why would you pay for accommodation for a person for 6 months once they've arrived, when presumably 1 month would have been adequate?
Well, that certainly shouldn't have happened.
So how did it happen?
I can't give you an answer to that. What I can say is that I was not aware of and did not authorise that. So
would it... people are saying you will need to go. I mean, you said on the day that the documents came out you were not going. I mean, is that the right approach, Bob, or would it, tendering your resignation, actually be help people to just move on and put this behind them while we continue to wait for the SSC results?
My interest is in what's going on within our organisation, and I am confident that the best interest of the organisation at the moment, given the amount of change that we've got going on, is that I stay in place. Now, that's a decision ultimately that a minister will make.
About whether you should stay or go?
Absolutely.
Lastly,
all chairs within the DHB system are in exactly the same position.
Has David Clark asked for your letter of resignation in case he decides? Not yet. Hasn't asked. Okay.
No.
Okay. Lastly, it keeps coming up. Some people are saying when you have the senior doctors union saying, "Whoa, go slow here. We worry about this person. We don't think this is a good appointment." Would it not have been a good point 3 years ago, given the head of the senior doctors union was saying, "Look, this is not a good appointment"? Wouldn't it have been good to just think twice?
Which we did do. After issues were raised, and I have to say they were raised through the media, not directly with us. Ian Powell's never approached me about this at all, but when those issues were raised in the media and then raised by one or two of our staff members with me, we immediately went back. We'd just completed the reference checking. We went back to all of the relevant referees and put the issues that were raised with us to those referees. All of them rejected the claims that Ian Powell had made.
But as a chair of a DHB, you would know as well as anyone that your chief executive has to get on well with the senior clinicians. If you haven't got that, then you've got a pretty dysfunctional ship to start with.
That's absolutely true. And again, we spoke to one very senior clinician in Canada around how that relationship had worked, and he spoke very highly of the relationship.
Okay. So do you know where Dr. Murray's gone?
I don't. We communicate through his lawyers, so where he's living, I have no idea.
This issue has done a tremendous damage to the DHB. You'd agree with that?
It absolutely has done a damage in terms of the media perception. But again, when I go around our community...
What do you mean the media perception? This happened under your watch.
One of the nice things around the health system is that most families have contacts with it. And as I go around our community, that's the one we serve, I consistently get feedback from people about how well treated they've been within our organisation. So from that point of view, there's a very large, I believe, community understanding of the benefit of our service.
Okay.
Now, quite clearly, these events should not have happened, and we need to work our way through them and get beyond them.
But you don't accept any personal responsibility for it?
If you mean by that I in any way caused it, no, of course I don't.
But you don't, no, I'm not saying caused it, accept any personal responsibility for the fact that this happened while you were chair and all this money has gone out of the DHB for purposes that should never have been approved.
And were not approved.
But that still went. It still happened.
Were not approved.
Yep, okay. Well, it weren't approved, but it's happened, didn't it?
Absolutely, it happened.
This is Bob Simcock, the DHB chair, talking to our health correspondent Karen Brown. We'd really love your feedback on this. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, of course. And our email is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Speaking of DHBs where things shouldn't have happened, we're checking in on urology at the Southern DHB after their weekend mega clinic later in the program. It's coming up to 19 minutes past 5. It is the big reveal in Auckland. Today, homeowners rushed online for their first glimpse of the council's 3-year property revaluations. This is bizarre stuff. 120,000 people made, wait for this, a total of 10 million property searches in the first day of access to data to individual homes. The scene had been set last week when Auckland Council said the average house had risen in value by 46% to nearly $1.1 million since the last valuation occurred. One news organisation asked, how much did you gain? Remember, this is a council valuation, not a cheque. But as our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports, there's nothing quite like seeing the numbers for your own property.
Oh, okay, 1.475. Yeah, that's nice.
Polly Williams is talking millions here.
That's quite a big increase from last time. I think we were just over $1 million last time.
Polly's 2-bedroom villa in Mount Eden is worth 40% more than 3 years ago, according to the Auckland Council anyway. And that's a below par rise in a city where the average house value is now officially almost $1.1 million. The good news is that a below average rise in value means her rates next year might rise less than the average or even fall.
Well, that would be a first if our rates went down. And to be honest, I wouldn't really want them to go down because I think that there's so much infrastructure that needs to be built in Auckland. And I would hate to think that there are people in other parts of Auckland who, might struggle to pay their rates if they increase a lot.
The big factor in the valuation increases is the rising price of land, not the bricks and mortar. In Kumiu, for example, on the northwestern fringe, one house on a 1,000 square metre section rose in value by 30%. Next door, an 8.5 hectare farm, zoned for future residential use, rose by almost 160%. A 3-bedroom home unit in once affordable Avondale jumped from $670,000 to $900,000. But the eye-watering rise of over a third is still below average for the suburb. That rise is almost equivalent to the value of an average house in Invercargill. Owners can challenge the valuations, but the council's head of rates, Debbie Aycott, says it's two-way traffic.
What we found with the last revaluation is approximately half of the objections people wanted them to go up and approximately half people wanted them to go down. It depends what motivation people have got.
On this day 3 years ago, the Auckland Council website crashed under the load from curious property owners. Debbie Aycott says an upgrade this time has coped with 120,000 people who aren't just checking their own property.
They're checking a number of properties, seemingly an average of about 10 each, so you tend to want to look at your neighbours as well. Or a real estate agent might be checking their properties they've got on file.
Polly Williams is not getting carried away, nor does she need to hear the repeated warnings to Aucklanders not to go on a spending binge on the basis of rising values.
We don't really think about the housing market a lot because, as I said, your house isn't worth anything until you sell it. And who knows what it will be worth when we do need to sell it. I mean, what if the market crashes and it's, not worth a lot when we do need to sell it. But for now, it's good.
What it all means in terms of next year's rates bill won't become clear until next June. I tamaki makoro mo te hotaka o te ahiahi ko Todd Nile tēnei.
The government is forging ahead with its plan to create an agency to work towards a manned re-entry into the Pike River drift, with the possibility that it could happen by late next year. Now, the Pike River Recovery Agency will gather evidence about what happened in the 2010 tragedy in which 29 people died and consider how to avoid such accidents in the future. It will be established in January with a budget of up to $23 million over 3 years. While making the announcement a short time ago, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern had this message for the families.
We're giving them the commitment we're going to do everything within our power to try. And that's all they've ever asked of us. Of course, they've always had competing evidence against what has been provided by the last government that told them that an entry was possible. We've committed to establishing an agency to see that through. But what we've both committed to together is that safety is a priority. And what we've said is if we uncover any information that says that there are problems along the journey to re-entry, we will work it through together.
Ms Ardern says, of course, there will be risks.
Our job is to mitigate them as far as possible and to weigh up whether there was an acceptable level of risk. But as I've said, there are risks every day that those miners walked into that mine. The risk they took on was an unacceptable level of risk at the hands of the company they worked for. Now it's incumbent on us to make the right decision to try and re-enter that drift. But, of course, we've got to do it with all the information, make our best endeavours to re-enter, but, of course, weigh up those risks as we go.
Jacinda Ardern speaking in the Beehive a short time ago. The responsible minister, Andrew Little, expects the agency to deliver him a plan by early 2019. The plan would then be peer-reviewed and a decision made about whether it's safe to proceed. He says the existing health and safety legislation would not need to be changed.
We will go through the normal risk assessment and hazard assessment steps that any business or any organisation would go through in a project like this. And in the end, the decision will come back to me as Minister. I'll have the benefit of the advice from the agency. Their advice will have been peer reviewed, and I will have an independent advisor to me as well as Minister, so that all those checks and balances are provided.
Andrew Little, this would of course be a manned re-entry, meaning the government has also scrapped current plans announced by the national government in January to send a robot into the mine. That was due to be sent in by Christmas. It is now not happening. All of that announced in the past hour or so. It's 25 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The Rugby League World Cup has reached the semi-final stage. The Australians host Fiji on Friday night in Brisbane, and Tonga hosts England in what will effectively be a home game in Auckland on Saturday evening. The Kiwis are out, having lost their quarter-final to Fiji. Now, just as the All Blacks were out of the quarter-finals in the Rugby World Cup, losing to France in Wales in 2007, remember Graham Henry stayed on as coach and the All Blacks went on and won the next World Cup. But there does somehow seem less hopes of a phoenix rising from the ashes of New Zealand Rugby League. The Warriors had another underwhelming season, finishing 13th of 16 in the NRL. Players with dual eligibility are increasingly opting to represent countries other than New Zealand. And the national coach, David Kidwell, is regarded as a very nice guy who simply can't galvanise an increasingly disconnected team. So I asked Alex Hayton, the CEO of New Zealand Rugby League, if David Kidwell is staying on.
David's contract with the Kiwis as head coach finishes at the end of the World Cup. So once we've completed the review, we'll be advertising for new management roles, and I guess the decision is for David as to whether he wishes to reapply or not.
Right, so he's gone at the end of the World Cup, and for the Kiwis the World Cup has ended, right?
Correct.
So he is now no longer the Kiwis coach, or is that still yet to be formalised?
So his tenure finishes at the end of the World Cup. He will be involved, obviously, in the review process, and then it finishes from there.
And then the job becomes vacant and is effectively advertised?
Yes.
And if he applies for it, would you expect him to have any chance of getting it?
Well, that won't be my decision to make. That'll be the decision of an interview panel that we put in place to do that.
Right. Are you happy with his performance?
I guess we're all disappointed from the point of view that, the team's last two results, were not in the semi-finals of the World Cup. So, if you just look at it from the hard results point of view, no, we wouldn't be happy. But I think it's not just David alone. I guess, the team is also involved in that.
Can we talk about the team and their response after the loss to Fiji? Did you think, personally, as you were watching this unfold on television or at the grounds, that their response was appropriate?
We're talking about the game itself? Or
after the game. After the game. The comments from Sean Johnson, the chewing of the gum by the skipper, the sense that they weren't really assuming responsibility for a performance which was pretty underwhelming.
Look, I think both players were pretty disappointed by what had just happened. I think sometimes...
Did they show that? Do you?
Yeah, look, I think so. I think you could tell that Sean was really disappointed.
Although, sorry to interrupt, Alex, he seemed most disappointed by the fact that he had given ammunition to critics of New Zealand Rugby League, of the team. He didn't seem disappointed by the result as much as the fact that the critics were proven right.
Oh no! Look, I mean, I spoke to him in the changing rooms, and he was gutted. And I think sometimes, talking to players straight after a game where it hasn't gone their way, sometimes the emotions and that you don't say the right things. They were both disappointed.
What did go wrong?
Well, I guess that will be the outcome of the review as to were all the right support mechanisms in place for the team to help it achieve, and then if they were, what affected the performance on the day. And I guess that'll be down to the review panel to do that.
Alex, I don't want to give you a hard time, but they lost to Fiji, they lost to Tonga. The last time we played the Wallabies, the Australians, the Kangaroos, we were walloped by them. The Warriors have had yet another underwhelming season. At what stage is somebody going to say, in very plain English, this simply isn't good enough?
Oh, look, we're not accepting of the results, and we want to do better. I mean, everyone is very passionate about the Kiwis, and we want them to do well. And I can certainly tell you from the organisation's point of view, that is, what we're focused on. I think, we shouldn't, the changes in the eligibility rules also mean that teams like Tonga and Fiji are a lot more competitive now, and we shouldn't be just assuming that we're going to walk through some of these games going forward. I mean, they are full of NRL players and very good players. So if we want to have a truly global game in international rugby league and compete with other sports, it means you've got to have a number of teams that are competitive, not just the big three.
Yes, and it is exciting. I couldn't agree with you more. It is exciting to see the development of rugby league as a truly global game. The rise of the Tongan team, which is, unless you're a real Kiwis fan, is one of the true highlights of the Rugby League World Cup so far. How do you now secure the services of players who are eligible to play for both Tonga and New Zealand, or Fiji and New Zealand, and there are many players in that category, when it would seem on the face of it there is greater esprit de corps, greater team spirit, a greater sense of pride about playing for Tonga and Fiji than there is about playing for New Zealand?
I think there is a great pride in playing for New Zealand. I think the World Cup presents an opportunity once every 4 years for the smaller nations like Tonga and Fiji to be able to have more than just one game a year, and so it's a chance for those teams and those countries to come together. The challenge is to make sure that we are picking the right people going forward who will commit and play to New Zealand in the long term, because we can't be building a team in between World Cups and then have half them disappear as we go to the World Cup. So, as part of the review, we'll be looking at the selection policies and processes going forward to make sure that those things don't happen.
It's Alex Hayton, the CEO of New Zealand Rugby League. 28 to 6, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's a full-load program tonight, so let's get straight into the headlines with Anna Thomas.
The police in Wellington have named a man they want to speak to over the shooting of a taxi driver on Saturday night. They're looking for Dylan Nuku, who's 26 and described as armed and dangerous. Officers have searched several houses looking for Nuku. The cab driver, Adlem, has just been discharged from hospital. The bullet broke his shoulder bone in 2 places. The chairman of the Waikato District Health Board, Bob Simcock, says he was unaware of the scale of travel by the DHB's former chief executive. Nigel Murray resigned from the board last month after rising concern about unauthorised spending and travel by him. Dr Murray spent $218,000 during 3 years in the job. A new standalone government agency will be established in January to start planning for a manned re-entry into the drift of the Pike River mine. The department and its budget of up to $23 million over 3 years has been announced by the minister responsible, Andrew Little. He says he expects the agency to deliver him a plan for re-entry by early 2019. More than 120,000 Aucklanders have gone online today to check their new council property valuations. The council said last week city home values had risen on average 46% over the past 3 years. But today was the first chance for owners to look at individual property details. The Australian government has cancelled a sitting week for the House of Representatives to allow the Senate to finish debating the same-sex marriage bill before it goes to the lower house. The move comes in the midst of a citizenship crisis and a backbench push for a royal commission into the banks. And a man is dead after being hit by a train near the Hiratonga railway station in Upper Hutt this afternoon. A Wellington Free Ambulance spokeswoman has confirmed a man was hit and died before the ambulance got there. Metlink say buses are replacing trains between the Taita and Upper Hutt stations, and those buses won't be running to a timetable. The 420 Waited Upper service was also delayed. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is on the other side of me in the Auckland studio. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Metro Glass. We have never talked about them before, as far as I'm aware.
No, but we haven't.
No.
No, but
well, they've turned the corner with an improved first half
That's
profit.
Right. Well, there are like a number of other building industry companies we've talked about: Fletcher Building, Steel and Tube. A Well, actually, we talked about them last week, and you weren't here.
Yeah, but I was listening, Nona.
Okay, well, very good then. Okay, so Metro Performance Glass is a public listed company, and they manufacture glass. They're into double glazing, these kinds of things. And they have operations also in Australia, which has helped their result. So their first half was just a little bit ahead of last year, and now they're forecasting a little bit ahead for the full year. That's right. No, sorry. Yeah, that's right. So it's a forecast that we've got here from them. Now, what's interesting about them is it's been really difficult for Metro Performance Glass. I mean, there was a public listed company, a lot of fanfare, good, strong building industry, and yet they've been underperforming. In fact, their share price was $2.15 like a year ago, and today, after gaining nearly 5%, it was at 92 cents.
Wow.
That gives you an indication of just how far they've fallen in terms of the shareholder outlook. So,
how much was it? $2.15?
Yeah, a year ago. And
now
today,
90 cents.
92 cents after gaining 4% today. So really quite an improvement. And it's hard to know exactly what's gone wrong with the building industry, but we're seeing this across the whole sector. So it's been really difficult.
Right. More people will be affected by this, Nona, directly affected by it. The rising prices of butter.
We've talked about butter a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely fascinating.
You know,
and driving up food prices overall.
Well, you know what? It could be worse. It could be a shortage of butter.
Yeah.
So the prices are way up. Well, according to the latest food price index, $5.67 a block, but I saw it on sale today for about $5.90. So I think the prices are better than that. And if you look around the world, the prices...
The prices are better than that if you're a farmer, worse than that if you're a consumer, right? The prices are north of $6.
But, you know, it's really a demand situation. It's not so much the dairy prices are reflecting that. It's that really consumers are wanting that. Now, they've gone away from the margarine, you know, and not that Kiwis have eaten a lot of that. We've had such wonderful butter. But in other countries, butter has really picked up. And so in some countries, there's shortages. And the prices are high. Look around just New Zealand, in places which don't offer discounts to consumers, you know, the prices are as much as $9. It's a lot of money, and but at least we'll still have our butter for this season. So what else do we got?
What do the markets do, Nona?
Okay, well, the index, the NZX Top 50 index was up about 1/3%, which is kind of remarkable because it's been down in global markets today. So we gained 28 points to 8,090. But our dollar is really hit an 18-month low overnight. You know, we dropped below 68 cents. So we're trading at 68.1 US cents, 90.2 Australian, and 51.6 pence, which is kind of telling because there's weakness in international currencies. And so we're down. Normally we kind of bump up, but we haven't. So we'll see. We're going to keep an eye on that. We'll see what happens.
Nona Peltier, who was with us all week, thank you very much indeed, Nona. Robert Mugabe, who is 93 and so unwanted, he's been escorted to the door by his own military and expelled by his own party. Today summoned Zimbabwe's media to a formal announcement and said he would not be standing down, even by the standards of a man given to overweening self-regard. It was bizarre. I asked David Coltart, a Zimbabwean lawyer who was a founding member of the Movement for Democratic Change, an MP and a cabinet minister in the Government of National Unity, and whose book, The Struggle Continues, chronicles what he calls 50 years of tyranny in Zimbabwe, why Mugabe didn't accept the invitation to leave.
I think it's a combination. I think first of all, he's very proud. He had a gun put to his head by the military, by his own party today. They said that he should resign, and if he didn't resign, he would then be impeached. That would be deeply humiliating for him. He's always been a proud man, and I think he decided he was not going to be subjected to that type of treatment. So that's the first reason. The second reason, I think that we may be seeing signs of dementia. He looked disheveled.
Yes.
He rambled through this speech. He's obviously under enormous pressure. He's 93, almost 94. And I think that we see the early signs of dementia. A third and final factor may be that he's just simply playing for time, that he hasn't extracted sufficient concessions yet. He's hoping that President Zuma or the Southern African Development Community will come to his assistance, and perhaps he feels that if he can hold on for a few more days, he might get a better deal out of this.
If he doesn't go immediately or very close to immediately, will he be impeached? Will there be that political conclusion to the not quite finished coup? Is that the most likely response, do you think?
Impeachment is the only constitutional response available to the military, to Mnangagwa, the Vice President, or former Vice President Mnangagwa. And of course, the military are desperate to persuade the African Union, SADC, and the world at large that this isn't a coup. And so if they're going to continue with that fiction, they have to resort to the Constitution. And the only way the Constitution allows for Mugabe to be removed now is if Parliament votes on an impeachment motion. They have to secure, as I said, two-thirds majority in Parliament to get it. But I think that they will get the two-thirds majority if the opposition MDC votes with the ZANU-PF members of Parliament.
It's really interesting looking at all the analysis of Mugabe now, the stock taking, the reconsiderations. And Milton Nkosi for the BBC says, remember, there is a part of the community that still respects Mugabe for the role he played in the liberation struggle against white minority rule. He was in prison for 10 years. He fought his way through until Zimbabweans gained their own independence in 1980. So there are still people who respect him even though they want him to step down. So that's Milton Nkosi. Is there a constituency who feels that way about Mugabe, or has that check been well and truly cashed?
I think that check still carries a lot of value in Africa. Robert Mugabe, when he travels in Africa, is often lauded as a hero. Africans across the continent who don't know the detail of how he's destroyed Zimbabwe regard him as a hero. And so I think that he still has a lot of sympathy across Africa, and he's no doubt playing on that. There are some people who still sympathize with him in Zimbabwe, but it is a tiny minority now, and as we saw from the massive crowds that turned out on Saturday, the overwhelming majority of Zimbabweans now want him to go. His own party wants him to go, and he doesn't seem to grasp that.
Can we go back to those crowds you were talking about on Saturday? Will life be better for them when Mugabe goes? Clearly they want him gone. But will their lives be materially improved, or is that still a long, long march?
I fear it's still a long march. Whether it's a long, long march is another matter. But even let us assume that Robert Mugabe is impeached or resigns in the coming days. It is clear from his successor within ZANU-PF, Emerson Mnangagwa, that there's no desire to work with the opposition. There was a statement made this afternoon by the same man who announced that Mugabe must resign. And it was a pretty arrogant statement. He said, no, they didn't see any need to cooperate with the opposition. And what we expect from that is that Mnangagwa will take over the reins of power enjoyed by Robert Mugabe, sort of lock, stock and barrel. He will be much closer to the military than Robert Mugabe has been. And the reality is that the same generals who have called for Mugabe to stand down are the generals who, in essence, got him elected in 2008 and 2013. They wield enormous power in this country, and all that's happened is that they've shifted their allegiances from Mugabe to Mnangagwa. And we have to assume that they will work as hard as they did for Mugabe for Mnangagwa in the forthcoming election.
That's David Coltart, who was a cabinet minister in Zimbabwe, also still a lawyer specialising in human rights. It's coming up to 5:45. Queenstown's revamped bus service Hit first day teething problems today. The $4 million initiative features a pioneering $2 flat fare for all of the Waikato Basin and a doubling of the bus fleet in a bid to try to lure thousands of locals out of their cars and into the buses. But not everything went to plan on day one. Ian Telfer reports from Queenstown.
All you wanna do is ride around Sally. Let's go.
It seemed like a normal Monday morning in Queenstown, with a band playing on a stage positioned over a stream and a themed PR launch of a hot new product. But for a change, it was public transport getting the makeover as the new buses took to the streets. And in case the $2 one-way flat rate wasn't enough of a lure, the service has been made free for the first week. The transport agency's South Island director, Jim Harland, says it's a bold plan.
2% of people are using urban buses at the moment. We've got one major state highway coming into the centre of town. It's simply not sustainable for private vehicles, one or two people in them going forward. So this is getting ahead of the curve. It's providing a reliable quality service. There's absolutely no reason why people shouldn't take it as their first point of choice.
But passengers trying to get to work this morning were let down by at least 2 buses not arriving, including one which broke down after running out of diesel. And there were reports of new drivers who didn't know where they were going. Gerard Collings from the Otago Regional Council says the teething problems will be sorted out quickly.
We had a number of instances with drivers not quite hitting the right timetable, some mechanical issues with a couple of the buses. But really, considering we are still bringing fleet in on Friday and Saturday, I think, the Ritchie's crew have done a really good job to get them operational today.
But commuters around Queenstown don't appear to have been put off, with many saying they would now start using buses for the first time. Others have been paying $50 a week in bus fares, and now it will be $20.
It is really good because we can be able to go to Frankton and go to Park and Save, which is more cheaper than the grocery store here in town.
Do you use the bus normally?
I've used it once. I can't remember where I went though.
So no?
No, but I'm hoping, because I don't have a car, that it will help me get around more.
Yeah. So $2 buses?
Yeah, awesome.
Just worried about people with families with lots of children. Because generally I think they had the school buses for free and now everybody has to pay.
Parking fees in the city are doubling to pay for the new scheme, and as an extra incentive to get people to park up their cars. But there's no escaping the fact that one of the richest centres now has the cheapest buses. Aboard the first new bus trip from Arrowtown this morning, Queenstown's Mayor Jim Bolt told me his aim is ultimately to make the buses free.
Not everybody in the district is rich. We don't all live in flash houses and drive BMWs, so a public transport system is required. And look, it's a factor around the world that tourists will ride on a good public transport system.
Local councils are already starting on a feasibility study for commuter ferries on Lake Wakatipu, and they're dreaming of a light rail system to the airport, though if Auckland's any guide, that'll be a much harder bargain to strike. In Queenstown for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
12 to 6. Police have revealed details of a 26-year-old man they are searching for in relation to the shooting of a Wellington taxi driver over the weekend. They say Dylan Nuku is believed to be armed and dangerous and should not be approached by anyone. Their plea comes as the Taxi Federation warns that people will find increasingly difficult to catch a cab on Friday and Saturday night if violence against drivers gets any worse. Katie Gossett reports.
The driver, Lem, was discharged from hospital this afternoon but is still recovering from the bullet wound that broke his shoulder bone in 2 places. He'd picked up a man and a woman in central Wellington and took them to the suburb of Miramar, where they got out of the car without paying. He says the man then asked him to get out of the cab and when he refused, shot him with what Lem thinks was a pistol. It's a story that's got John Hart of the Taxi Federation very worried.
It's a serious concern for people in the taxi industry. There have been safety worries for many years driving at night, but they have got worse. Alcohol and increasingly drugs have made the situation pretty tense some nights, especially Friday and Saturday nights all around the country.
Mr Hart says the government recently cut safety measures for drivers, removing the need for panic buttons in passenger vehicles. He says cameras are still mandatory for traditional cabs, but not for app-based services like Uber. And he says Saturday's shooting shows the importance of both security measures.
It really just reinforces our view that security cameras are essential in all small passenger vehicles. There was one in this vehicle, and it will help to identify the people responsible. And duress alarms, panic buttons, which give the driver the ability to summons help by pushing a button, are absolutely essential.
John Hart says other possible solutions could be screens separating drivers and passengers, although he says it would be difficult to find something that gave total protection. That's a problem that a Tauranga man, Carl Cochrane, tried to tackle several years ago, designing a perspex shield that would fit around a driver. But he says he abandoned the project when drivers were required to install cameras and didn't want other costs.
I just think, the cameras aren't going to stop it, and here's another example why. There's been a few since they brought in the cameras, and it still hasn't stopped them. They're still going to do it. I think it's a good way to stop them altogether, but if the people don't want to pay the money, they're stuck with their cameras and there's still a risk of them getting hurt.
John Hart says ultimately there's no easy solution, but violence remains a big problem for the taxi industry, and if it persists, people enjoying a night out on the weekend might find it hard to catch a cab home.
It's very, very difficult to get taxi drivers out there on Friday and Saturday nights because of the dangers. Many of them just say, well, they're not prepared to face that and don't go out.
Police say they are determined to find who is responsible for Saturday's attack and are making good progress. For Checkpoint, this is Katie Gossett.
People needing to rent a house are finding it tougher across the country, but they're finding it especially hard in the capital, where the number of properties available to rent is down 70% on this time last year. Eric Frickberg reports.
A shortage of properties on offer and a growing number of would-be tenants is leading to a severe rental shortage in Wellington. Renters that can't afford to buy their own homes are staying in the market longer. And TradeMe's Nigel Jeffrey says a lot of owners are simply not offering their home for rent in the first place.
At a national level, the total stock available in the market is 50% lower than it was 12 months ago. Wellington is 69% lower, so there are less properties available for new tenants.
Mr Jeffrey says that's leaving a growing number of potential tenants with nowhere to go.
If you look at sort of the volume of tenants looking at properties, what we can say is that the average rental property is now receiving 28% more inquiries in the first week that it's listed compared to a year ago.
Summer is typically a hot period in the local rental market, but Wellington Property Investors Association President Richard Bacon thinks the problem could be exacerbated if the new government hires more public servants who'll need somewhere to live.
We're coming into summer and there's always a tightening of the rental market in the summer, and I think we're going to have a tight rental season. The new government is likely to bring in more people to the Wellington CBD looking for property. It will play into the tightness of the market, yes.
And those who do manage to find a home are paying the price. TradeMe figures show rents rose 7.1% annually in Wellington. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
So let's go to Newlands, just north of the CBD, where Eric's been at a house viewing.
Well, John, this is one of just a scattering of houses that are available for rent in Wellington at the moment. A year ago, there were about 20. Now there are hardly any. This one is going for $475 a week. Now, 25 people have turned up who want to rent it today. Another 15 will turn up next week, so that's how competitive it is. And I'm joined by one of them now, Frank Doherty. Frank, can you tell me what it's been like for you to find a place to rent?
It's very difficult at the moment. There are so many people bidding for so many, very few properties. There are, this is just a prime example of the sort of competition that there is out there, and also a price war as well, where people are trying to outbid one another up and above the market rentals.
So what does that mean to you? How does it affect you? How does that leave you?
Well, I have a very strict budget, and obviously I have a limit that I can reach, but above that, no, I just have to go at the bottom of the pile as far as trying to find a property goes.
So where are you living in the meantime?
We're not too far from here, probably about 10 minutes away.
And why are you leaving?
Well, basically because our current landlord wants to move back into his property. Yeah.
So how would you describe the situation for rental here? What's it like?
It's dire. There just isn't enough properties available.
Thank you very much, Frank. And I'm joined by another would-be renter, Jamil Morel. Jamil, tell me what it's like for you to find somewhere to live.
Well, much like Frank said, it's been pretty tough. Been looking now on and off for the last 5 or 6 weeks, probably about 3-4 places a weekend, and yeah, it's just tough going out there.
So who do you want to rent for, yourself, your family?
Oh, it's mainly myself, but I have a couple of daughters who stay with me, pretty much week on, week off. So, yeah, we're looking for a 3-bedroom place.
Why are you leaving your current place?
The current landlord's selling, so they've given me a few weeks to move out. They're pretty lenient, and they're pretty flexible, so I can pretty much call them tonight and say, look, I found a place to move out this weekend.
How would you describe the current market? How well do you think it works for ordinary people who just need a roof over their head?
Well, I guess so long as you've got the money to pay the rent that they're asking, you're pretty much good as gold. I work in IT, so I earn a reasonable dollar, but some of the places around are just huge amounts of money to go out for rent.
And what sort of condition are those houses?
A bit of a mixture. I mean, yesterday I saw one that was pretty cheap and pretty horrible, to be honest. It was no natural light in there. It was all dark and no sunlight.
So have you got a message for the government or the council or anyone like to try to fix this situation?
Yeah, drop rents and put more houses out there. Simple.
Eric Frickberg with would-be renters in Newlands, Wellington. Let's head to Otago now, where Moeraki residents have a battle on their hands and they need help. A warm spring and plenty of feed has led to what locals of the coastal Otago settlement describe as a plague of rabbits. Carcasses litter the roads, burrows pock the hillsides and parks, and the township wants help to fight back. Timothy Brown went to Moeraki to investigate.
Bunnies, they're called. Soft, cute and cuddly. Many a children's bedtime story has been written about their antics. But the bunnies besetting Moeraki are keeping residents awake at night. Moeraki Village Holiday Park owner Robbie Mitchell says the population is larger than he's ever seen.
They've probably doubled in size from 2 years ago. There's little ones, 3/4 grown ones right through to full ones. Cleaning out everything, yes. Yep.
He says the proportion of the plague becomes most obvious in the evening and morning.
You could drive from the main road into Moeraki, which is probably 1.5 km. You'd see at least 50 or 60 rabbits on the road, first thing in the morning and in the evening.
And for farmers and landowners, the plague is causing destruction.
They're eating a lot of the grass the stock would have. It takes 7 rabbits to 1 sheep, so some of the farms around here have got tens of thousands on there. In the town, it's erosion, because Moeraki's known for its erosion, slipping, so it's certainly not helping. And people with gardens, unless you've got it fenced, rabbit-proofed, you're wasting your time.
He believes the Otago Regional Council should step in and help residents, and he's not alone. Waitaki District Councillor for the Waihamo Ward, Jan Wheeler, says the Regional Council needs to step in.
We'd just like to find a solution because it's becoming unmanageable, really, for people. It's fairly out of control, so we're just hoping that Regional Council or someone will come up with an idea that will help us.
She says residents had pinned their hopes on the release of a new strain of the rabbit hemorrhagic virus disease. However, that application is before the Ministry for Primary Industries and has already faced delays and may yet be months away.
We need to do something. It's right out of control at the moment. The ground moves in quite a few places with them when you drive through Moeraki.
She says the inability to shoot or poison rabbits in residential areas has caused the population to explode. But the Otago Regional Council's Director of Environmental Monitoring and Operations, Scott McLean, says there are at least 2 poisoning agents which are available to landowners and can be used in the town. He says the council is developing advice to take to residents about what measures can be used. At present, pest control is in the hands of landowners, but the council is reviewing that policy and residents can provide feedback on the strategy. Mr McLean says the council hopes to be able to release the new strain of rabbit hemorrhagic virus disease in Moeraki.
If
the central government approved the release of it. Moeraki's been identified as a priority site for release, so that it's certainly no silver bullet. But if we're able to release that, then that will help land occupiers in their rabbit control efforts.
In the meantime, he recommended seeking out the council's advice and utilising measures such as rabbit-proof fencing. In Moeraki for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
So much feedback coming in on Bob Simcock and the Waikato DHB. Hi, John. Bob Simcock's assurances that the people of Waikato appreciate the hard work of the DHB is true. What we do not appreciate is the cronyism and arrogance that he exhibited in relation to a CEO he was amply warned against appointing. The refusal to listen to clinicians is a serious issue, says Kim from Hamilton. The head of the Waikato DHB needs to resign. The buck stops with him, says Diana. So much more. We're going to keep looking at this. Thank you. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The police in Wellington have named a man they want to speak with over the shooting of a taxi driver on Saturday night. They're looking for Dylan Nuku, who's 26 and is described as armed and dangerous. They've searched a number of houses looking for Nuku. The cab driver, Alem, has been discharged from hospital after being treated for a bullet wound that broke his shoulder bone in 2 places. He'd picked up a man and a woman in the central city and took them to the suburb of Miramar, where they got out of the car without paying. Alem was then told to get out of the taxi, and when he didn't, he was shot. 120,000 Aucklanders have checked out 10.3 million properties in the first day of access to the council's data on its 3-yearly property revaluations. The valuation process is a statutory one used to work out each property's share of the city's rating burden, which will be carved up using the new data next June. Polly Williams' 2-bedroom villa in Mount Eden is now worth $1.475 million. It was valued at $1 million last time, but she says they don't dwell on such figures.
We don't really think about the housing market a lot because, as I said, you know, your house isn't worth anything until you sell it, and who knows what it will be worth when we do need to sell it. I mean, what if the market crashes and it's, you know, not worth a lot when we do need to sell it? But for now, you know, it's good.
A new standalone government agency will be established in January to start planning for a manned re-entry into the drift of the Pike River mine. If the decision is eventually made that it's safe to re-enter the 400 metres of the drift that remain unexplored, it could happen in late 2019. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The responsible Minister Andrew Little has revealed the timeline for a possible re-entry and the agency's budget of up to $23 million over 3 years. The agency will gather evidence about what happened in the 2010 tragedy in which 29 men died and consider how to avoid such accidents in the future. Mr Little expects the agency to deliver him a plan by early 2019. The plan would then be peer-reviewed and a decision made about whether it's safe to proceed. Mr Little says safety will always be paramount and health and safety laws will have to be followed at all times. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The head of the Waikato District Health Board says he was unaware of the scale of travel by the DHB's former chief executive. Nigel Murray resigned from the board last month after rising concern about unauthorised spending and travel by him. Dr Murray spent $218,000 during 3 years in the job. It's also been revealed that the DHB has spent $145,000 investigating the spending. Its chairman Bob Simcock says he saw and approved some of Dr Murray's travel expenditure, but not all of it. He says Dr Murray's travel set off no particular alarm bell for him.
I was aware that he was travelling quite a bit, but again, I was not always aware when he was away or not. We spoke regularly, often mostly by phone, and it's obviously apparent now that I wasn't necessarily aware of where he was when he was speaking on the phone.
The Waikato DHB chair, Bob Simcock. A man is dead after being hit by a train near the Heretonga railway station in Upper Hutt. The police were called shortly after 4 o'clock this afternoon. The Wellington Free Ambulance says the man died before the ambulance got there. Metlink says buses are replacing trains between the Taita and Upper Hutt stations, and those buses won't be running to a timetable. Work and income in Auckland's Queen Street will remain closed tomorrow after a fire today. About 60 firefighters battled the blaze in a complex on the corner of Queen Street and Turner Street, which is thought to have started about 7:30 this morning. A Ministry of Social Development spokeswoman Linda Smarden says the office has some minor smoke damage and will be closed tomorrow while insurers assess the damage. Ms Smarden says all appointments are being rebooked and the Queen Street-based staff have been deployed to other offices. Germans could be heading back to the polls after talks to form a coalition government collapsed. After 8 weeks of negotiations, the centrist Free Democrats have pulled out, blaming irreconcilable differences with Ms Merkel's Christian Democrats and the other party in the talks, the Greens. Angela Merkel will later meet the German president, who has the power to call a new election. She has warned of an uncertain period to come. Her words are translated.
This is a day of deep reflection, at least on how to go forward in Germany. But I want to tell you that as Chancellor, I will do everything to ensure that this country is well managed in the difficult weeks to come.
The translated words of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. It's 6:05. New Zealand has won 2 gold medals on the opening day of the Oceania Track Cycling Championships in Cambridge. The host nation took out the men's team sprint ahead of Australia thanks to the world champion trio of Eddie Dawkins, Sam Webster and Ethan Mitchell. The women's team pursuit quartet of Bryony Botha, Rushley Buchanan, Raquel Sheath and Michaela Drummond were also too good for their Trans-Tasman rivals. New Zealand's Emma Cumming and Olivia Podmore claimed silver in the women's team sprint. The New Zealand Rugby League Chief Executive Alex Hayton says they will be announcing this week the members of the independent panel to review the Kiwis' disappointing World Cup exit. Hayton says all the Kiwis management staff are off contract at the end of the tournament and the league will not be making any new appointments until the review is completed.
That will involve an independent panel. We'll be sending a questionnaire out to staff and selection of players from the team, get that back, conduct some one-on-one interviews with the aim of having a final report in January next year.
Alex Hayton. And the New Zealand women's hockey team are aiming to get their first win on the World League final tournament when they play the USA on Auckland's North Shore tonight. The Black Sticks have lost their opening 2 games to world champions the Netherlands and South Korea, and that's the news.
This week on Nights, we've got a window on the world of Trumponomics. Nick Bollinger assesses the gospel according to Bob Dylan. Because RNZ Concert is once again settling the score, we've dedicated this week's Sonic Tonic to the classics. Beethoven Was Black and other masterpieces. On Nights this week with me, Brian Crump. Afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Taumaranui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Fine spells, isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihape, fine with cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods with the odd shower mainly about Wairarapa. Cloudier tomorrow with a few morning showers. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine with morning and evening cloud tomorrow. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges both today and tomorrow. For Canterbury, cloudy periods with isolated showers about the high country. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with occasional showers spreading north. Otago, Southland and Fiordland often cloudy with isolated showers. Fine spells increasing tomorrow but remaining cloudy across eastern Otago. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with isolated showers. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint and John Campbell.
Just
found your seat.
Staggered. A member of Black Race, I am not. Anna Thomas. That was spectacular, young coordinator.
You almost missed the chair, didn't you? Right.
Your professionalism of carrying on as Basil Faulty stumbled in beside you was utterly admirable. Thanks, Anna.
That was good.
Lots of feedback tonight on Bob Simcock and the Waikato DHB. We are going to look at this and at Nigel Murray and his history. Thank you, all of you who are giving us Really excellent insights and suggestions. And a man called John has texted in saying how much he enjoys you reading the news, Anna Thomas.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. 6:09. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Auckland homeowners rushed online today for the first glimpse of the city's updated individual property valuations. It just wasn't their own properties they were keen to check out on. Wait for this, 10 million property searches made by 120,000 people. Some of you, to be frank, are nosy parkers. While investors might be feeling smug given the average increase of 46% over the last 3 years, many families are feeling trapped by a soaring market that is excluding many people from any kind of participation at all. Looking at what happened today, here's Nita Blake-Person.
It'll be 20 years next week since Polly Williams and her husband bought their two-bedroom Eden Terrace home. Back then, they paid less than $300,000 for it. They've been watching house prices in the area climb over the years, but were still happy to see their valuation today was up on the last one 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's nice. 1.475. That's a big increase from last time.
That's around a 40% increase on the home. But with their suburb jumping 65% in the past 3 years, the increase is comparatively modest. That's a win-win for Polly, who reckons at least she won't get too much of a shock when her new rates bill arrives next year.
I would expect our rates to go up because that's what they do. They never go down. But if they're not going to go up by a huge amount, that would be helpful.
Even with their home's increase in value, Polly says the latest valuation won't have much of a material impact.
It's paper money to me. I mean, your house isn't worth anything till the day you sell it, as far as we're concerned. So I think, I don't know what we would do with that information. Probably just have a, looks good for our retirement plan because this is it at this stage.
It's mostly good news for Polly and her family, but soaring property prices across the city also mean they're trapped in the Auckland market.
Our house is too small. We have 5 people living in a 2.5 bedroom house, and we do need more space, and I do feel a little bit trapped by that because sure, our house might be worth a lot more than what we bought it for, but to buy a bigger house is, even we can't really kind of afford to do that. So, yeah, I can totally understand the plight of people that are trying to get into the housing market, but we kind of feel a little bit the same because we also can't afford the house that we need.
Polly says they're resigned to staying put for the moment, but at least she can see the impact her rates are having on the area.
We've seen just so much development in our area with, we've got the City Rail link going on down there. We're going to have an amazing precinct down there, and my kids, when they're old enough to go out and party, are going to be able to get a train into town. And, so when you see all that sort of stuff happening, you're kind of okay with rates going up a little bit.
A full breakdown of rates bills won't be known until next June. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person aho.
The urology department at the Dunedin Hospital held a mega clinic over the weekend to address the waiting list problems identified at length on Checkpoint during July, August and September. It was a catch-up exercise supported by urologists and specialist nursing staff from throughout New Zealand who travelled to Dunedin to assist Southern DHB staff address concerns about waiting times and care provided in the urology department at the city's hospital. 561 urology patients were seen over a busy and reportedly successful weekend, from first-time specialist appointments to more serious procedures, including 45 patients having biopsies. I asked Dr Nigel Miller, the DHB's Chief Medical Officer, how many of those biopsies have returned positive results for cancer.
Well, we won't have those results yet. I can't give you a figure, obviously, because I don't know, but you'd expect around about 40%.
OK, so roughly 20 of the 45.
If that turns out to be true, yes.
Should they, and I know we've had this discussion many times and we do appreciate you fronting again, should they need to be seen in a mega clinic?
Well, ideally, no, absolutely not. We should have had this all sorted out, and this is our, wrapping up all the things that have been outstanding. So some of those patients are more recent referrals since this process started, so it hasn't all been people who've been dragged out, but you're quite right, there have been delays that are unacceptable.
If we go back to the external review in June 2017, so June of this year, and probably the most famous of the key observations, there is a significant level of clinical risk within the long-waiting patients at the Dunedin site. Were some of the people who had surgery over the weekend for prostate cancer those who had suffered the effects of that significant level of clinical risk?
I can't give you the details of each case. some will have been delayed beyond what was desirable, absolutely.
Do you now know how many people have been delayed beyond what was desirable?
I can't give you a definite figure yet. We've been focusing, as you would reasonably expect, on getting the work done to get it effectively caught up to where we should have been. And then once we've done that, we can work out precisely what the figures are.
OK, let's talk about the process of catching up to where you should have been. How far through that process are you now? How many more mega clinics required?
Just one. It won't be as mega as last weekend. It'll be a smaller catch-up on swallowing up some of the things that may have come up in this clinic, and a few other patients that couldn't make it to this clinic, wasn't convenient, and so on. So we've done the majority of it, but there's a smaller number left to do with a smaller number of clinicians. I haven't got the precise numbers for that.
And that's the second weekend in December?
I believe so, yes.
And then at that stage, you will be where you would like to be. In other words, you will have caught up.
That's our expectation, yes.
What sort of state were the patients in? Were they relieved, happy? How were they at the mega clinic over the weekend?
Well, the impression I got, I met most of the urologists who came down from around the country, and I must admit, we very much appreciate their commitment. It was really a huge effort for them to give up their weekends to do this. And the feedback I had from them, that most of the patients were very pleased to be seen, and some of them said they found the process simple and straightforward, and it worked very well for them. So I didn't hear of many negative comments. People were just pleased that we're getting on with the job.
Are you going to get the resources you need to ensure this never happens again?
I think it's a mixture of things. Definitely there's a need to review the resources and the way they're applied. For example, the staffing levels. We've done some of that already. We've engaged extra nurses, and we're looking at what to do about extra specialist time. As well as that, it's reorganising the way we do things. And we've demonstrated that. Well, we've had the assistance and help from a lot of people to come up with a different way of running clinics and being more organised, which is what we run over the weekend, and that'll provide us a model for the future. So it's a mixture of, people don't like the word efficiency in health because it kind of implies you're not working hard, but sometimes people end up working really hard because it's inefficient. So getting things lined up so the care of people referred into the urology service is streamlined and things run smoothly through, rather than them involving extra time for clinicians at many steps. We can plan things ahead.
Dr. Nigel Miller, who's the Chief Medical Officer at the Southern DHB. Let's head from Dunedin to central Auckland, where a large fire in a building this morning forced evacuations and blocked off a main road in the very centre of the city, snarling up rush hour traffic. About 60 firefighters battled a blaze in an office complex, which is home to Work and Income, StudyLink and Whitirea Polytech on the corner of Queen and Turner Streets, bang in the centre of town. Jessie Chang reports.
Aucklanders coming into the CBD this morning were met with chaotic scenes on Queen Street, with 15 fire trucks lined up along the road and dozens of emergency personnel surrounding the building. Thick plumes of smoke blew out of the complex and could be seen as far away as the Harbour Bridge. Fire and Emergency Area Commander Richard Toomey says the fire started in a kitchen on the third floor of the building at around 7:30 this morning, and the people inside had to be evacuated.
Actually, it had blown out through the back windows. Looks like it may have even been a bit of a flash fire. It's actually got going quite quickly, and then it sort of, from the windows, it spread up the back of the building and into the other floors.
Richard Toomey says there has been structural damage to the building and it will have to be closed for repairs. He says luckily no one was injured. Senior lecturer Rosita Thomas was inside the building when the fire started.
While I was having my breakfast in my office, I heard the fire alarm, and it was a long, prolonged alarm, and I thought that this is not a joke.
Ms Thomas says it was only when she left the complex with about 6 other staff members and saw the smoke that she realised how serious the fire was.
I was a little scared because this is the first time I'm seeing a real fire this close, and that also it's because it's our building.
Whitirea has cancelled all classes today. Everardo Morera, who studies IT there, says he turned up this morning to chaos.
I came here and there are a lot of smoke, black smoke, getting out of the building, and then I cannot enter in the university because it was a fire.
Queen Street between Merrill Drive and Karangahape Road was closed for some time, but reopened after midday. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang.
Almost 6:19. A massive air and sea search involving 5 countries is underway for a missing Argentinian submarine in the South Atlantic. All contact with the Navy sub San Juan, which has 44 crew on board, was lost last Wednesday. It was last known to be 430k from the southernmost tip of Argentina. Bad weather has been hampering the search. This is a kind of nightmare, isn't it? The ABC's Anne Barker has this report.
Submarine crews, by their nature, are trained to evade detection, but efforts to find the San Juan and its 44 crew have turned into a multinational military operation. The German-built sub was on a routine mission when it disappeared off the radar, though a series of failed satellite calls intercepted at the weekend have given hope the crew are alive. Captain Enrique Balbi is a spokesman for the Argentinian Navy. 7 call attempts of a few seconds, possibly a very low signal, which were not finalised, he says. That information is still being checked to get concrete data on the sub's location. We'll continue working with triple the effort as we're doing. Navy protocol calls for a submarine to surface immediately if communication is lost. But the San Juan was travelling 2,000 miles up the Argentinian coast and could be anywhere in a vast stretch of ocean. Its last known location was 430 kilometres off the country's southern tip. But Navy Rear Admiral Gabriel Gonzalez said bad weather is complicating the search. The weather in the area continues to be very difficult, he says. Right now we have waves of 6 to 8 metres high with west to southwest winds of 40 knots. Unfortunately, these conditions are expected to remain for the next 48 hours or so. A massive search is now underway involving at least 5 nations. The US has sent sophisticated undersea rescue equipment, and its Antarctic patrol ship, HNS Protector, has been diverted to the South Atlantic Ocean. Captain Enrique Balbi. We're already in the area of operations, sweeping the zone, looking both on the surface and underwater, because we won't rule out any hypothesis. One man trained in detecting submarines is Andrew Davies, Director of Defence and Strategy at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra. He says solidarity among submariners will mean crews around the world will be waiting in hope that the San Juan crew are rescued alive.
Submarines, of course, their main asset is being hard to find once they're submerged. So that's a double-edged sword when you have something like this where you're looking for a submarine that might be underwater.
How long do you think the sub could last with oxygen on board?
It depends what else is going on board. If there's been a fire, that consumes a lot of the oxygen.
How much does this remind you of the Kursk disaster in Russia in 2000?
Well, the Kursk disaster was a bit different because the Kursk, we know now, had suffered several onboard explosions, and a small number of the crew had managed to survive for a while. But unfortunately, in part of a submarine where escape was impossible. So we have the benefit of hindsight with the Kursk, so we know what happened. In this case, we have very little idea.
It's Andrew Davies there, ending that report from the ABC's Anne Barker. It's 6:22. So much feedback coming in tonight on Bob Simcock, Nigel Murray and the Waikato DHB. Thank you. We'll have a sample of it before the end of the program, but we're going to use a lot of it to help us continue our investigations into what exactly happened and why Nigel Murray was able to do what he did for so long. As Kiwi Rugby League fans lament New Zealand's dismal World Cup campaign, Pacific Rugby League is on the rise. Both Tonga and Fiji are through to the semi-finals of the tournament, while the only thing looming for the Kiwis is an independent review of just where it all went wrong. The rise of the Pacific nations at the tournament has come off the back of several lead players opting out of playing for New Zealand and Australia and going with their countries of heritage, prompting some to label them effectively traitors, although, by golly, those countries like Tonga and Fiji have had things very much stacked against them for a long, long time. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson sifts through the wreckage of the Kiwis tournament and the rise of the game in the Pacific.
And Fiji are into the semi-finals, a famous victory here. Extraordinary match and a tournament that started so promisingly for New Zealand has ended in disaster.
As Kiwi fans wondered where it all went wrong, Fiji fans celebrated. After a shock loss to Tonga in their final pool match, the Kiwis lost 4-2 to Fiji to be dumped out of the World Cup at the quarter-final stage at the weekend, their worst ever performance at the sports showpiece event. So where did it all go wrong? Ahead of the tournament, the star NRL forward Jason Taumalolo, born and raised in Auckland, opted out of the Kiwis, deciding to play for his country of heritage, Tonga. The Kiwis were also missing former captain Jesse Bromwich and fellow player Kevin Proctor, both banned by coach David Kidwell from the tournament after a drugs bust earlier in the year. How badly did they miss them though? On the face of it, hugely. And coach David Kidwell's future's now in limbo.
It's not a short-term fix. The Pacific nations, they've stepped up. Their community, they come out and support their teams. We've got to make sure that we're performing on the field so we can fill those stadiums with Kiwi supporters. But you just look at some of those stadiums, the one in Hamilton, was covered in red. We've got to do our job on the field to make sure that the stadium's in black.
The chief executive of New Zealand Rugby League, Alex Hayton, maintains the Kiwis aren't broken, but concedes the code will suffer locally, even if it means the game's developing internationally.
If we want to have a competitive international game, which is what we're trying to do in growing rugby league, at some point you're going to have to wear some losses.
But former rugby league commentator and professional player Peter Ropati says it's obvious the problem's a lack of leadership.
There's something not right in the team. There's something that's terribly, terribly wrong. And when I listen to David Kidwell, and I feel for the guy, he's so out of his depth. He has absolutely no idea on how to even deal with this.
Ropati says the Rugby League World Cup has changed.
The bulk of the players now are made up of professional footballers. Gone are the days where you might find half the squad are made up of guys that are playing out of Nuku'alofa or playing out of Apia. 99% of them are either involved in the NRL or Super League, so they're quality footballers.
The Fiji coach Petero Sivnasiva, who represented both Australia and Fiji, hopes this tournament's just the start of the rise of Pacific Rugby League.
Could be the start of something really big within rugby league. We've seen the dominance of those Tier 1 nations for quite some time, but now and I think it all started on the back of players wanting to step away from representing Tier 1 nations to go back and honour their heritage. I think it sends a real powerful message.
Jason Taumalolo copped a backlash when he belatedly decided to play for Tonga rather than New Zealand at the tournament. But Damon Salesa, who's an Associate Professor of Pacific Studies at Auckland University, says the Pacific community's been moved by the decisions of many players to opt for their countries of heritage, giving up the opportunity in all likelihood of winning the World Cup and the chance of making more money.
Many of the people I'm around, and myself included, have been really moved by the decision, particularly the players who would have made the front line of both Australia and New Zealand. Their decision to play for their ancestral Pacific homeland has been really moving. They've put their connection to their homeland above the money they could have made and even perhaps their chance at winning a World Cup.
Damon Salesa says while many players who opt to play for Pacific countries may have been born in New Zealand, they feel more connected to their homeland.
If you actually walk the streets of a place like Otahu, it's probably the largest Tongan concentration in the world. It's very, very Tongan. And so there are parts of New Zealand that are just so profoundly Pacific that might be driving them. I also think that both of these players have kind of proven everything they need to prove. And there's no question that by choosing to go with Tonga, they made more of a difference to both the Tongan team and the Rugby League World Cup than if they'd chosen to go with New Zealand and Australia.
Under International Rugby League regulations, players nominate a Tier 1 side, like New Zealand or Australia, which they'll play for if selected. They can also nominate a Tier 2 team, like Tonga, on the assumption that if they miss out on being picked for the Kiwis or the Kangaroos, they'll play for that Tier 2 side. Damon Salesa now feels that rule may change.
Australia and New Zealand both sort of conceived of the Pacific nations, just as they do in rugby union. They conceive of them as a kind of B team for Australia and New Zealand. And then when you get called up to the A team, in their mind, the All Blacks or the Wallabies or the Kiwis or the Kangaroos, you shouldn't say no. And what we've seen is that people will say no, that there are other things they value. And I think, we're going to see more players perhaps contemplate this because of just how powerful this has turned out to be for tens of thousands of Tongans. And I suspect there's a bunch of Samoans players who, next time the Rugby League World Cup rolls around, if they haven't changed their eligibility rules, they might think about making similar decisions as well.
So while New Zealand League fans are lamenting the Kiwis' demise, many in the country are celebrating. Not the Kiwis being eliminated, but the rise of the Pacific, which will now see Fiji play Australia in Brisbane on Friday night in one World Cup semi-final, while the other will feature Tonga against England in Auckland on Saturday night. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Lovely package, Stephen. Imagine if Tonga and Samoa, for example, were able to do the same in rugby. 7 Pacifica players playing for Romania against Samoa over the weekend. Imagine if they were able to retain more of those players at home. The implications for world rugby. Lots of feedback tonight. Nigel Murray and his supervision by Bob Simcock. The overspending of his expenses and his excessive leave is less of an issue than his poor governance of the WDHB. It's a bit like getting Al Capone for tax evasion rather than murder. The question has to be asked, if the overspending hadn't been identified by his PA, how long would it have been for his poor performance as a CEO to have triggered his resignation? Read Bob Simcock. Where were the checks? Where were the systems that track the money? No small business could operate like this, and it is unacceptable that he's chair of such a lax and dysfunctional administration. How is it that these guys on massive incomes really, if ever, resign? We really appreciate your feedback on this subject, and we are going to continue to look at it in some depth. Finally tonight, a really lovely email from Ian Chapman. Dr. Ian Chapman, who was a senior lecturer in music, well known to many of you, I suspect, at the University of Otago, and he says it's great that the Southern DHB is caught up on its urology debacle. I really am pleased. Just a small point, and I don't want to put such a downer on such a positive change to this situation, but I'd gently like to point out that the DHB's now redeemed position has also been helped by men like me who gave up on them and went private for our biopsies. Yeah, that is a really good point, Ian, and I'm delighted your biopsy was clear. Thank you all for being with Checkpoint. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police say Dylan Nuku, who they want to speak to over the shooting of a taxi driver in Wellington, is armed and dangerous. A new government agency will plan for a manned re-entry into the drift of the Pike River mine. 120,000 Aucklanders have checked out 10.3 million properties for the latest revaluations. And people staying in rented homes for longer because they can't afford to buy homes is one of the reasons for a big drop in the number of rentals available. Our next news and weather at 7.
Sweetheart scams and cyber fraud.
Is this Ernest? And he said yes. And I said, oh, I love you, I miss you. I've been waiting to hear from you.